The Francis Durbridge serial, Paul Temple and the Geneva Mystery. Episode 1, Too Young to Die.
I don't really care for this restaurant, do you, Steve?
No, I much prefer that little place we usually go to. You know, you're drinking far too much coffee, Paul.
It's a sign I've been working hard.
Have you really finished the novel?
Mm-hmm. Finished it last night.
Well, are you pleased with it?
Am I ever really pleased with anything I write? Steve, how would you like a holiday?
Switzerland?
Wherever you like.
I'll think about it. Yes.
I know the next line. If we go to Switzerland, I'll need an awful lot of new clothes,
well,
darling.
It's true, I shall. Paul, that man over there, near the service table, keeps staring at us.
Yes, I saw him. His name's Maurice Lonsdale. He's a financier. Owns a great deal of property in the West End. As a matter of fact, I think he owns this place.
Do you know him?
Only by sight.
Maurice Lonsdale. I've seen his name in the gossip columns.
You probably have.
I say, looks like a financier. Even to the carnation in his buttonhole. Oh, he's leaving.
Yeah, he probably heard you saying rude things about him.
But he can't possibly
No,
have
of course
heard.
he couldn't.
To get back to Switzerland, when would you want to go?
Oh, whenever you feel like it. We could leave on Friday.
Oh, that's pretty short notice. And you've got to book the hotel, and I have to arrange for Charlie to do...
Excuse me, sir. Mr. Lonsdale asked me to give you this note.
Oh, thank you. Oh, and you might get my bill, waiter.
Yes, sir.
What is it, Paul?
He says he'd like to see me in his office.
What about, I wonder?
We'd better go and find out, darling.
Do sit down. This chair is more comfortable, Mrs. Temple.
Thank you.
I do hope you'll forgive me for staring at you just now, but it seemed such a remarkable coincidence.
Coincidence?
Yes, I picked up the phone twice this morning with the intention of speaking to you, and then at the last moment I changed my mind.
Well, what did you want to speak to me about?
It was about my sister, Margaret Milbourne. You may remember her as Margaret Beverley, the actress.
Oh, yes, of course.
About 6 years ago, she married Carl Milbourne, the book publisher.
Carl Milbourne?
Yes.
Wasn't he killed in a car accident about a fortnight ago?
Yes. You knew Carl?
I'd met him, but I didn't know him well.
Where did this accident happen?
In Geneva. Dreadful business. Margaret, poor darling, has been in a terrible state ever since it happened. The last 2 weeks have been pure hell.
It must have been a dreadful shock for her.
Yes.
Was she with her husband when it happened?
No, he was in Switzerland on business. He was knocked down crossing the road. I had to take Margaret out to Geneva to identify the body. Believe me, that was quite an ordeal. Carl was so badly smashed up, his face disfigured.
It must have been an ordeal for both of you.
Margaret's always been highly strung, and I'm afraid this has quite unbalanced her. That's why I was going to phone you, Temple. You see, she's got this extraordinary idea that, well, that Carl isn't dead.
But surely you saw the body.
Yes, I'm positive it was Carl. Well, apart from anything else, I recognized the suit he was wearing.
Then why should your sister think that it wasn't her husband who was killed?
Well, for one thing, she consulted a medium. She asked her to get in touch with Carl, and she failed, and Margaret seems to think that this proves that Carl is still alive.
But surely one
It's
can't.
ridiculous, but you know what women are when they get ideas into their heads. Also, Margaret's very depressed because they had a quarrel of some kind just before he left for Geneva.
But can't her doctor help her?
He prescribes sedatives, Mrs. Temple, but she refuses to take them. I'm afraid my sister's completely dominated by this obsession of hers, so much so that she's made up her mind to consult you, Mr. Temple.
But why should she consult me?
Can't you guess why? She wants you to find her husband for her.
How much further have we got to go? I thought you parked the car just round the corner.
I did. I left it in front of this letterbox.
Well, it isn't here.
Well, this is very odd.
It's very annoying. I'm getting terribly wet.
I don't understand this. I swear I left it here.
Did you lock it?
Yes, of course I did.
Well, we can't just stand here.
No, I suppose I'd better ring the police. We'll go back to the restaurant. I can phone from there and we can pick up a cab.
All right. Oh, gosh, it's absolutely pouring down now.
Wait till you see the papers tomorrow morning, won't I just look a fool? Paul Temple's car stolen. Private Eye sends for Scotland Yard.
Hey, you picked a very nice job, Den. I'll say that.
Yeah, she goes like a bird.
And did you find any papers?
No, I went through the pockets and the dash.
No idea who it belongs to, then?
No, I picked her up in one of those squares off Knightsbridge. Sure, when she's had one of Bert's repaints, no one will recognise her.
That, and only 5,000 on the clock.
Yeah, good as new. Better in some ways.
It's an hell of a night. Shouldn't think the cops will be hanging around on a night like this. Hey, how long will it take us to get to Bert's place?
About 40 minutes. Don't want to go too fast.
Nah, don't take any chances. Hey, does that car want to pass us? It's been on our tail for the last couple of miles.
Yeah, I've been watching him in the mirror.
It couldn't be a police car.
You tell me. I'll slow up a bit.
If they're slowing up as well. I can't see for the headlights. I don't think it's the cops, then.
Oh, well, we're coming to the double carriageway. I'll wave them on. I wish we'd change those damn plates.
Hey, they're coming up, then.
What the hell's he playing at?
Ah, it's all right. It isn't the cops. Pull over a bit.
Are they still coming?
They've opened the side window. What the devil are they? Look out, Denny's got a gun.
What are you talking about?
Den, pull up. We're going for the ditch.
Steve.
Yes, darling?
Do you think you could tear yourself away from that paper for a minute and pour me some coffee?
Oh, sorry, dear. We're out of coffee, so I asked Charlie to make tea.
All right, then, tea. And maybe a little sympathy.
Sympathy?
Well, the car was stolen last night, remember?
I've been reading about it in the paper. Mr. Temple, usually so self-possessed, was irritated when our reporter asked about the stolen car. Don't ask me what happened. Snapped Britain's #1 private eye. I haven't a clue.
I never said a word about not having a clue. Yes, what is it, Charlie?
There's a police inspector in the hall. Inspector Lloyd, I think he said.
Oh, that'll be about the car. Ask him to come in here.
Yes, sir. In here, please, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Temple.
Oh, good morning, Inspector. I don't think you've met my wife.
No.
Steve, this is Inspector Lloyd.
Good morning, Mrs.
Good
Temple.
morning, Inspector.
I just looked in to let you know we found the car.
Have you, by Timothy? That's quick work.
Yes, but I'm afraid it's in pretty bad shape. There was a serious accident.
Oh.
Where did you find it, Inspector?
We found it in the ditch just outside St. Albans. It's very nearly a write-off, I should say.
Oh, no.
Lord. Any trace of the driver?
I'm afraid so. He was still at the wheel with 2 bullets through his head.
Oh, no.
Well, who was the man, do you know?
Yes, he was a well-known car thief named Den Roberts. We found some fake number plates in the back of the car. I dare say he planned to swap them as soon as he got to St. Albans.
You've no idea who shot him, I suppose?
No, we haven't. We think there was another person in the car, but he or she got clean away. There's a bit of a problem, but Sir Graham said to let you know we're working on it.
Thank you. What's happened to the car, by the way?
It's in the Pentagon garage in Cumberland Street. They're going to give you a ring.
Oh, good.
Well, if there's nothing else, Mr. Temple, I have a busy morning.
Yes, of course. I'll see you out.
No, I'll see myself out. Good morning, Mr. Temple.
Good morning, Inspector.
Good morning.
I suppose it didn't occur to Inspector Lloyd that whoever shot the thief might have thought that they were shooting you.
What? Oh, good Lord, Steve, whatever gave you that idea?
How you know? You'd thought of that yourself. You must have done.
It never entered my head.
Paul, it was your car. It was a very dark night. The number plates hadn't been changed, so anyone following the car must have thought it was you who was driving it.
Not necessarily. Besides, how do you know the shots came from another car? Yes, Charlie, what is it now?
It's Mrs. Milburn, sir. The lady seemed a bit upset, so I'll put her in the study.
Oh, all right. Tell her we'll be with her in a minute.
It's no use, Mr. Temple. The more I think about it, the more certain I am that the dead man we saw that morning wasn't Carl.
Then why didn't you say so at the time, Mrs. Milburn?
I was so upset, so confused.
But your brother identified the body.
Yes, I know, but he was upset too, and... You've seen Morris, then?
Yes. My wife and I had dinner last night at the Lescaut restaurant. Your brother invited us into his office for a drink.
Oh.
Tell me, what was your husband doing in Geneva?
He went out there on business, to see Julia Carrington.
The Hollywood film star?
Yes, she retired to Switzerland 4 years ago, and Carl had heard a rumour that she was writing her memoirs. He was very anxious to find out if it was true.
Yes, the autobiography of Julia Carrington would certainly be a scoop for any publisher.
Yes, that's what Carl said. He had a very good agent in Switzerland, but he insisted on seeing this woman himself.
Mrs. Milburn, I don't doubt that you really believe that your husband isn't dead, but is this feeling just a hunch?
No, it's not just a hunch, Mrs. Temple. It's more than that. A very great deal more.
Do you mean you have proof that he's alive?
Yes, I have proof, and that's why I came to see you.
Then tell me about it, Mrs. Milburn.
When I came back from Switzerland after the accident, there was a parcel waiting at home addressed to Carl from a shop in St. Moritz. It contained a hat, Carl's hat, the one he wore when he went to Geneva. He had a weakness for buying hats. I knew immediately what had happened. He had apparently visited St. Moritz, bought a new hat, and had told them to post his old one home.
Yes, but this must have happened before the accident.
I'm coming to that, Mr. Temple. The hat was no use to me, of course, so I gave it to the gardener. The day before yesterday, he asked to see me. He said he'd found a piece of paper in the brim of the hat. Here it is.
Oh, go on, Mrs. Milburn.
Will you see the handwriting and the date on that piece of paper?
Yes, I see the date.
January the 6th. That note was written 2 days after the accident, yet it was written by my husband.
Are you sure it's your husband's handwriting?
Yes, I'm positive.
What's in the note, Paul?
Please don't worry. Have seen Randolph, and everything will be all right. We'll get in touch later.
But your husband couldn't have written that note after the accident, Mrs. Milbourne.
Yes, if you believe it was my husband that was involved in the accident. But I've already told you I don't think it was Carl who was killed.
Then who was it?
I don't know.
Mrs. Milbourne, assuming your husband did write this, does it make any sense to you? Have you heard of anyone called Randolph?
No, I haven't. I can't imagine what he means.
Well, now, what would you like me to do?
I'd like you and Mrs. Temple to come out to Switzerland with me.
With you?
I want you to make absolutely sure that it was my husband who arranged for the hat to be sent back to London. Also, I'd like to know what Carl was doing in St. Moritz. He never told me he was going there.
Well, perhaps he went to see Julia Carrington. I believe she has a house in St. Moritz, as well as Geneva.
My brother spoke to Miss Carrington when we were in Geneva. She said she'd never seen Carl. Apparently her secretary had had a brief chat with him, and that was all.
I see. Mrs. Milbourne, do you mind if I ask you a personal question?
Please, ask me anything you like.
Did you and your husband have a quarrel before he left for Geneva?
Well, how did you know? Did Morris tell you?
He vaguely mentioned it.
Well, please don't get the wrong impression. Carl and I very rarely quarrelled. In fact, there was only one thing we ever really disagreed about.
Mm-hmm.
Carl was anxious to avoid death duties. He always took it for granted he'd go first, and, well, he just would talk about it. I hated the subject. I used to keep telling him, "You're too young to die, Carl."
And he talked about death duties the night before he left for Geneva?
Yes, he did. But we were quite friendly again the next morning, and I saw him off at the airport.
I see. Well, I'd like to think about what you've told me, Mrs. Milbourne. Where can I get in touch with you?
Oh, here's my card. You can ring me at that number any time.
Ah, thank you.
I'm very grateful to you for listening to me. It's very kind of you both. I hope you'll be able to help me, Mr. Temple.
Well, we'll see.
I'll see you out, Mrs. Milbourne.
Thank you. Goodbye, Mr. Temple.
Goodbye, Mrs. Milbourne. Paul Temple speaking.
Good morning, Mr. Temple. This is the Pentagon Garage, Cumberland Street.
Oh, good morning.
We've got your car here, Mr. Temple.
Oh, yes. What's it like?
I think you'll recognise it, sir, just about. When can you take a look at it?
Well, this morning sometime. Probably about 11:30.
That's fine. Ask for Mr. Watford.
I'll do that. Thank you for ringing.
Who was that, darling?
It was the garage about the car. Did you see Mrs. Milbourne off all right?
Yes. Poor woman, she's had a bad time of it.
Yes.
Well, are we going to Switzerland?
I don't know. There are one or two things which don't quite add up.
Such as?
Well, for one thing, if that note was written by Carl Milbourne, why on earth didn't he... It's all right, I'll take it. Hello?
Is that Paul Temple?
I seem to know that voice.
You should, Ducky. It's Dolly. Dolly Brazer.
Good Lord, Dolly, after all this time. How are things with you?
To tell you the truth, Mr. Temple, dear, I'm a bit worried.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Dolly. Is there anything I can do?
Yes, I think there is. I'd like to talk to you, Ducky, and tell you all about it.
All right, Dolly, why don't you come round here?
Well, if it's all the same to you, dear, I'd sooner meet you somewhere else. In the open somewhere, at the park, someplace like that.
Well, what about the zoo?
Oh, that's a wonderful idea. Just the place. I'll be inside the main gate in about 40 minutes. See you then, dearie.
Yes, all right, Dolly.
Well, you're certainly having a busy morning, Mr. Temple. Who is this Dolly?
Take your mind back 7 years, Steve, to the all-time flop of the season, Over My Dead Body by Paul Temple.
Yes.
Dolly Brazer played the maid.
I remember her now. A pert little redhead. Wasn't she involved in some drug scandal or other?
Yes, I put her in touch with Arnold, and he got her off with a very light sentence. She was pathetically grateful.
I remember.
Well, I must get a move on. Steve, let's meet for lunch. Usual place, about 1:15.
Yes, that's fine. And Paul, don't be too nice to Dolly Brazer.
Ah, there you are, Dolly. It's nice to see you again. How are you?
Oh, I'm all right, dearie.
You don't look all right. You look very worried to me.
Yes, well...
Oh, come on, let's sit down. Now, what's all this about? Have you been getting into mischief again?
No, I haven't.
Well, what are you doing these days? Where are you working?
I've tried all sorts of things since we last met, Mr. Temple. I even did typing till I found out I couldn't spell.
You haven't answered my question, Dolly. Where are you working now?
I'm a nightclub hostess.
Oh, where?
Oh, in Soho.
And you're in trouble?
No, I'm just worried about you.
Worried about me?
Yes. I've never forgotten what you did for me. And... look, Mr. Templar, I wish you wouldn't get mixed up in this Swiss affair.
Swiss affair? You mean Mrs. Milbourne and...
Yes.
Go on, Dolly.
I don't want to see anything happen to you, or that sweet wife of yours.
Why should anything happen to us?
It will if you get involved in this Milbourne affair.
You know Mrs. Milbourne?
No, I've only heard of her, in a roundabout way.
She came to see me this morning.
Yes, I know. She told you her husband wasn't dead and she asked you to help her.
Yes.
Well, don't, Mr. Temple. Don't. It just isn't worth it.
It's very nice of you to be so concerned about us, Dolly, but Steve and I have come up against a few ruthless people in our time, and we're still alive to tell the tale.
Then you are going to help Mrs. Milbourne?
I haven't made up my mind yet.
Well, I can't say I haven't warned you. I'd never have forgiven myself if I hadn't passed the word.
But you haven't passed the word, Dolly. You haven't told me anything.
I've told you to be careful.
Dolly, is Carl Milbourne dead? Was he killed in that car accident?
I don't know anything about Carl Milbourne. All I know is...
Go on.
A certain person doesn't want you to help Mrs. Milbourne.
Who is this person?
I don't know.
But you must know.
I don't. And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you.
Why?
Because I'd be taking a terrible risk, and I'm too young to die.
Too young to die?
Yes. Remember that, Mr. Temple. I'm too young to die.
There's a Mr. Stone from the Pentagon Garage. He'd like to have a word with you, Mrs. Temple.
Oh, Deborah, I'm just going out. All right, Charlie.
Right. Mr. Stone.
Oh, good morning, Mrs. Temple.
Good morning.
I'm from the Pentagon Garage in Cumberland Street. Mr. Temple's hired a car and asked me to deliver it to this address.
Oh, splendid. Just in time, Mr. Stone. I was going to ring for a taxi.
Oh, good. Then I'll see you downstairs, madam. The car's on the other side of the road.
Thank you. I'll be down in a moment.
Here's the key, Mrs. Temple. The logbook's in the cubbyhole with the insurance certificate, just in case you need them.
Thank you. Can I give you a lift anywhere?
Very kind of you. Which way are you going?
Towards Piccadilly.
Oh, no, thank you, Mrs. Temple. I've got to go down to Kensington. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Hello?
Is Mrs. Temple there, Charlie?
Oh, hello, Mr. T. No, she's just this minute driven off in a car.
What car?
Well, the one from the Pentagon Garage.
But I'm speaking to the garage now. Who delivered the car?
Mr. Stone. He said you rented a car.
Charlie, listen. Run downstairs. Get Mrs. Temple out of that car at once.
But she's gone, Mr. Temple. She left a couple of minutes
Charlie,
ago.
get downstairs. Run like hell. Whatever you do, get Steve out of that car.
Nice little traffic block, lady. Now we'll be here for hours. I was stuck at these flaming lights for 20 minutes last Monday and by fear missed his train.
Why on earth can't they do something about it?
Mrs. Temple! Mrs. Temple, hold on!
Charlie, whatever's the matter?
Mr. Temple on the phone.
Well, jump in, we're moving.
You've got to get out the car.
But I can't leave it in the middle of the road.
For heaven's sake, get out. Mr. Temple sounded desperate.
All right.
What's going on? You can't leave a car in the middle of the road like this.
I'm sorry, officer, but you see...
Madam, you're obstructing the traffic. You'll have to move that car immediately.
Do you feel all right now, Steve?
Yes, I feel much better. I think I'll get up, Paul, and have a cup of tea.
No, there's no need to get up. Charlie will fetch us one.
If it hadn't been for Charlie, I don't know what would have happened.
I do.
Paul, don't. Have you been on to the garage?
Yes. Needless to say, they'd never heard of your Mr. Stone.
What happened this morning?
This morning?
With Dolly Brazer.
Oh, can't you guess? She tried to borrow some money from me, £100.
And did you lend it to her?
No.
And why not?
Oh, I thought it might be the thin end of the wedge. You know what it is, Steve. Once you start lending people money,
Paul, what really happened this morning? What did Dolly want to talk to you about?
She gave me a warning. Not to get involved in the Milbourne affair.
Ah, I see.
I didn't mean to tell you about this, Steve. Not today, at any rate. I didn't want to upset you.
Well, I'm not upset. I've got to know these things. I've got to be kept in the picture. Please, Paul.
All right, darling.
Mrs. Milbourne's on the phone, sir. Shall I switch it through?
Yes, please do, Charlie.
Right.
Hello?
Mr. Temple, this is Margaret Milbourne. You left a message for me to phone you.
Oh, yes, I wanted to ask you something. Are you alone?
Yes. Yes, I am.
Did you by any chance tell anyone that you intended to consult me?
I told Morris, my brother.
Yes, I know. I mean anyone else.
No, I don't think I mentioned it to anyone. In fact, I'm sure I didn't. Why do you ask?
Well, thank you, Mrs. Milbourne. So sorry to have bothered you. I'll be in touch with you again later. Steve, have we got anything fixed for this evening?
No, thank goodness. Why?
I'm going out after dinner. I'll be about an hour. I'm going to have another talk with Morris Lonsdale.
I'm glad you saw my sister, but I hope you didn't take her too seriously.
I don't think we can dismiss completely everything she says, Lonsdale.
No, of course not, but the fact remains that I saw Carl after the accident and I identified him. However, you're a very busy man. I'm sure you had a reason for coming to see me this evening.
Yes. I wanted to ask you something.
Well, please go ahead.
Did you tell anyone that your sister was going to consult me?
I may have mentioned it casually to someone when we were talking about my sister. Why? Is it important?
While my wife and I were talking to you last night, my car was stolen.
Mm-hmm.
The man who stole it was shot. He was mistaken for me.
Good Lord.
At lunchtime today, there was a deliberate attempt to kill my wife.
And you think that both thieves...
I think that someone is deliberately trying to stop me taking an interest in the Milbourne case.
But surely no one would go to such lengths. Yes, what is it, Green?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir, but there's been a phone message for Mr. Temple.
Oh, yes?
Inspector Lloyd telephoned, sir. He wants to see you immediately. He's at the Middlesex Hospital.
Right, thank you. Will you excuse me, Lonsdale?
Yes, of course. Green, tell Williams to bring the car round and run Mr. Temple to the hospital.
Yes, sir.
That's very kind of you, thank you.
Ah, there you are, Temple. I'm glad you got my message.
Inspector, what is it? What's happened?
About an hour ago, one of our people found a woman called Dolly Brazer in a cul-de-sac just off Kilburn Street. She'd been beaten up very badly, I'm afraid.
How badly?
Well, she's pretty bad. She's only spoken twice. On both occasions, she mentioned your name. I'd like you to have a word with her, Temple. Try and find out how it happened.
Yes, all right.
If you'll follow me. And this is Mr. Temple, Doctor.
Ah, yes. Good evening.
Good evening, Doctor.
I've given her an injection, Mr. Temple, so I can't allow you more than a few minutes.
No, of course not.
All right, nurse.
Dolly, this is Paul Temple. Can you hear me, Dolly?
Yes. Yes, I'm here. Come a little closer, dear.
Right. There. Is that better?
Yes, that's better.
Who was it, Dolly? Who did it?
I don't know who did it. Honestly, I don't know.
You've no need to worry if you talk to me.
Mr. Temple, I'm going to get better, aren't I?
Yes, of course you are.
You sure?
Yes, of course I'm sure.
I'm too young to die. Remember that, Mr. Temple. Too young.
I wrote that book and sent it to Carl Milbourne. He liked the book, and I told him how I got the idea for the story.
Yes?
It was while I was in Hollywood. I was doing a picture for...
Steve, go up to the house and ask them to phone for a doctor.
Yes, all right, Paul.
I must tell you about the book. It was based on something that happened to...
To Julia Carrington?
Yes.
And you told Carl Milbourne about it?
Yes.
I see. Vince, what happened tonight? Did you really have an appointment with Julia?
Yes. Danny Clayton telephoned and said she wanted to see me.
Yes.
I was on my way up to the house when someone came up behind me and...
You must keep warm, Vince. Here. Let me put this coat round you.
Will he be okay, Doctor? Yes, I think so. But he can't be moved, Mr. Clayton. You'll have to stay the night here.
Is that all right, Danny?
Yes, of course. I've already spoken to Miss Carrington about it, but she wants to know what he was doing in the grounds at this time of night.
But you telephoned me and said Miss Carrington wanted to see me.
I didn't telephone you.
But you did. You told me to come
you
here.
You must be quiet, Mr. Langham. It's essential. I'm sorry, but there must be no more talking, gentlemen.
Yes, of course. I'm sorry, Doctor.
Try to get some sleep, Vince. We'll see you tomorrow.
Yes. Good night, Paul.
Good night.
And thanks for everything.
Obviously, the man's lying, Mr. Temple.
I'm sorry, but I don't agree, Miss Carrington.
Do you mean you don't believe Danny when he says that he didn't telephone Mr. Langham?
Someone telephoned him. If it wasn't Danny, then someone impersonated him.
But why should anyone impersonate me?
Anyway, it's extremely annoying.
Annoying?
If the newspapers get hold of the story, they'll assume that I invited Langham here because he's a film director.
Would it be such a bad idea if the newspapers did print the story? The whole story?
What do you mean?
I think it's about time we put our cards on the table. Someone tried to murder Vince tonight, and they very nearly succeeded. Now, it's my...
Are you suggesting that Julia had something to do with this affair?
I'm suggesting it's about time Miss Carrington told me the truth about herself and the truth about Carl Milbourne.
What do you know about Milbourne?
He was blackmailing you, wasn't he? Well, Miss Carrington?
Yes, he was. He still is.
Well, don't you think you'd better tell me about it? It started in Hollywood, didn't it?
Yes.
Many years ago when you were drinking heavily?
Yes.
Oh, go on.
I had a hideout in an apartment house in Santa Barbara. I used to go there by myself at weekends. I was on top in those days, yet I wasn't happy. I don't expect you to understand why I wasn't happy, but... Well, one night, during a drinking bout, I accidentally set fire to the apartment. I escaped, but many people lost their lives that night, including Danny's mother and father.
Go on, Miss Carrington.
There was an inquiry, and I went to the head of the studio and told him the whole story. Naturally, I wanted to accept full responsibility for what had happened. But the studio wouldn't hear of it. We were halfway through a picture. And the only person who knew that I was in Santa Barbara at the night of the fire was the manager of the apartment house. The studio paid him $40,000 to keep his mouth shut. Not only that, but they provided me with an alibi as well.
It must have been a ghastly experience.
Yes, it was, Mrs. Temple. Well, when Danny left college, I made up my mind to take care of him. Later, I retired and came to live in Europe. Then one day, Carl Milbourne came to see me. He showed me a manuscript of a novel called Too Young to Die. As soon as I read it, I knew that it was my life story.
Yes. Randolph heard your story from the manager of the apartment house and based his novel on it.
Milbourne told me he was Randolph and that...
He told you he was Randolph?
Yes, he was the author and owned all the rights in the book. Well, naturally, I asked him not to publish it. He agreed, subject to certain considerations.
How much have you paid Carl Milbourne?
Up to the time of the accident, about £40,000.
£40,000?
Yes.
Were you relieved when you heard about the accident?
I'm afraid I was. I thought that would be the end of the matter, but it wasn't. A short time after the accident, I had a phone call from Mrs. Milbourne. She said she felt convinced that her husband was still alive, and she asked me if I'd heard from him.
And what did you say?
I lied. I said I'd never even met her husband.
Go on, Miss Carrington.
About a week ago, I had a phone call from Carl Milbourne himself. He told me I had to make one more payment of $60,000.
Did he tell you where to deliver the money?
No, he simply told me to come to Samoritz and wait. He said he'd contact me here.
And has he?
No, not yet.
I begged Julia to go to the police, but she wouldn't hear of it. Finally, I persuaded her to see you. Then at the very last moment, on the day you arrived...
She funked it?
Yes.
Well, I haven't funked it now, Mr. Temple. I've told you the whole truth. What do you think I should do now?
There's no doubt in my mind what you should do, Miss Carrington. No doubt at all.
Oh, good evening, Mr. Temple.
Good evening.
I understand Mr. Lonsdale is a friend of yours.
Well, yes, we know Mr. Lonsdale.
There's been a rather unfortunate incident, Mr. Temple.
Oh?
One of the maids went into Mr. Lonsdale's room thinking it was empty. She heard groans coming from the bathroom, and Mr. Lonsdale had taken some tablets. He was very sick. The maid sent for me, and I got the doctor, of course.
Go on.
I noticed a letter on the bedside table addressed to Mrs. Milbourne, and I put it in my pocket. But as soon as Mr. Lonsdale recovered, he asked for it, and he tore it up immediately, Mr. Temple. The doctor thinks that Mr. Lonsdale attempted suicide.
Have you told Mrs. Milbourne about this?
No, it happened after she left, sir.
Left? I thought she was leaving tomorrow morning.
No, she left for Zurich this evening, sir.
I see. How is Mr. Lonsdale now?
Oh, he seems very much better. I thought you ought to know about this, Mr. Temple.
Yes, of course. It's very kind of you. I'll go upstairs and have a word with him. Room...
32, sir. He's in the annex.
I'm sorry that fool of a manager sent you up here, Temple.
Yes, he was quite perturbed.
I expect he was. He thought I'd been trying to kill myself, the idiot.
What happened exactly?
Well, I get these violent migraines. I had one all day, so I took some tablets I keep for it, and I must have taken too many. It's happened before. I dare say it'll happen again.
I see. Well, I'm glad it was a false alarm and that you're feeling better.
I assure you, Temple, I'm perfectly all right now. Nothing to worry about.
Good. May I use your phone?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Mr. Temple here, put me through to my room, please. Hello, Steve. It's all right, darling. There's nothing to worry about. He had a migraine and took too many tablets, that's all. No. That was a lot of nonsense. I'll be up in a few minutes. Yes. All right, Steve.
When I see that fool of a manager, I'll give him a piece of my mind.
I shall have a good night's sleep and forget all about it. Oh, I understand your sister left this evening.
Yes, she managed to get a reservation on the night flight from Zurich.
Oh. Well, good night, Lonsdale. If you should want anything in the night, just give me a ring.
Thank you, Temple. That's very kind of you.
Good night, then.
Good night.
Steve?
I'm in the bathroom. I'll be with you in a second.
Where's your mirror, darling?
Mirror?
Ah.
It's on the dressing table.
Ah, yes.
Paul, what was the point of that phone call from Lonsdale's room? What are you doing with the mirror?
There was a blotting pad on Lonsdale's desk that had been used recently, so I asked him if I could use the phone.
Mm-hmm.
I pocketed a piece of the blotter while I was talking to him.
Oh, let me look.
Well, it's rather smudgy. I can't read all of it. Dear Margaret, deeply...
shocked, isn't it?
Yeah, it says shocked. Deeply shocked by what you have told me. Cannot become...
Involved.
That's involved in this affair.
But what does he mean? What affair?
Well, it could be the Milbourne affair, I suppose.
Yes, but why should he write his sister a note like that? Surely he doesn't think that she's responsible for... Oh, Paul. You don't think Margaret Milbourne's the person behind all this?
And now she's trying to involve her brother?
Yes.
Hence the note and suicide attempt.
Yes. It'd be rather funny if we'd been underrating Mrs. Milbourne all this time, wouldn't it?
It would be even funnier if we'd been underrating Mr. Lonsdale.
Did you get your paper?
Yes, here. We'll go into breakfast if you're ready.
Oh, my tummy's been ready for the last half hour. Here's Lonsdale just coming out.
Good morning.
Morning.
How are you feeling this morning, Mr. Lonsdale?
Oh, I feel fine, thank you. I'm sorry about that spot of bother last night, Mrs. Temple. It must have given you quite a shock.
Yes.
Well, you look all right now, Lonsdale.
Thank you. Just off to the hospital to see Miss Sands.
Is she getting better?
Yes, but it's a slow job, I'm afraid. Oh, by the way, Temple, I meant to ask you last night, have you heard any more from the police about Carl?
No, nothing, I'm afraid. If there should be any development, I'll let you know, of course.
Yes, do. Well, I won't keep you from your breakfast.
Fine. Probably see you at lunch.
Yes, of course. Goodbye, Mrs. Temple.
Goodbye.
Mr. Temple?
Yes?
You're wanted on the telephone, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. Here's the paper, Steve.
Thank you.
I'll see you at the table.
Yes, all right.
This way, sir.
Hello?
Oh, Paul?
Yes, speaking.
This is Danny.
Oh, good morning, Danny. What can I do for you?
Julia had a phone call about half an hour ago. You can probably guess who it was.
Yes.
Julia answered the phone herself. She said it was the same man as before, the same voice. He said he was Carl Milbourne and that he wanted a final payment of $200,000.
200,000? What did Julia say?
Well, she did what you told her to do. She agreed to everything.
Good. Go on, Danny.
Well, the instructions he gave me are simple. I've got to take the money to London, and on Friday night at precisely 8 o'clock, ring Putney 1347.
Putney 1347.
That's right. Presumably our friend will be waiting for the call, and then he'll tell me where to meet him.
I see. Friday. That gives us 4 clear days. All right, Danny, go ahead. Carry out my instructions.
You sure you know what you're doing, Paul?
Yes, I know what I'm doing.
Okay, you're boss.
Oh, how's Vince this morning?
Oh, he's much better. He's going back to his hotel this afternoon.
Good.
Well, see you in London.
Yes, see you in London.
Excuse me, sir.
Oh, yes, what is it, Charlie?
Inspector Lloyd's arrived, sir.
Oh, good, show him in.
This way, if you please, sir.
Hello, Temple. Nice to see you again.
Oh, thank you, Inspector. Charlie, bring us some coffee.
Not for me, thank you. I'm in rather a hurry.
Oh, all right, Charlie.
We've traced that number for you. It's a call box on Putney Heath.
A call box?
Yes. I've arranged to have the box kept under observation from midday on Friday. When Mr. Clayton makes his call, it'll be recorded.
Thank you, Inspector.
Incidentally, we've seen Mr. Clayton. He's staying at the Savoy and seems quite anxious to cooperate.
Good.
Well, I'll be off. I just wanted you to know that everything was under control. We'll be in touch with you later.
Do you mind if we have the radio off, Steve?
Ooh, you're very edgy this morning.
I just can't understand why I haven't heard from Danny Clayton.
Have you tried to get hold of him?
Yes, I phoned the hotel twice, but each time he's out.
Well, why don't you try Sir Graham or the inspector? They may have heard something.
I've been a damn fool, Steve. I shouldn't have left everything to the police. I should have gone out to Putney Heath myself last night and waited. What is it, Charlie?
Inspector Lloyd's here, sir.
Oh, good. Ah, come on in, Inspector.
Good morning, Mrs. Temple.
Good morning, Inspector.
Don't go, Charlie. Is that the tape recorder?
Yes, everything went according to plan, I'm glad to say.
Take the recorder and plug it in, Charlie.
Yes, sir.
Now, be careful. The tape's on the machine.
Well, what happened?
Mr. Clayton made the call, and there was a man waiting for it outside the box. He had a scarf over his face, and we didn't recognize him. Well, not at first, that is. When he left the box, we tailed him out to Notting Hill Gate. He has a flat out there. His name's Spinner. We've heard of that gentleman before.
Did you pick him up?
Well, we're not that stupid. It's not Mr. Spinner we're after.
It's all ready now, sir.
Thank you, Charlie. You can go.
I particularly want you to listen to this phone call, Mrs. Temple. Listen carefully.
Why me, Inspector?
You'll soon see.
Is that Putney 1347? Mr. Clayton? Yes. You got the money? Yeah, I've got the money. What do you want me to do? Listen carefully. Put the money in a case and take it to the Carlos Club in Meldon Square. What, now, tonight? No, tomorrow night. Any time after 11. Leave the case with the cloakroom attendant. Give the man £1 and tell him someone called Leslie will pick it up later. Someone called Leslie? That's right. Carlos Club, Meldon Square, tomorrow night. Have you got that? Yeah, I've got it. You're sure? Yes, I'm sure. Okay, that's all, Mr. Clayton. Good night.
But I know that voice. I know that man's voice.
I was hoping you'd say that, Mrs. Temple.
It's the man who bought the car here. Do you remember, Paul? He said his name was Stone, and you told him to bring the car.
That's right, Mrs. Temple. Well, Stone, or Spinner, as he now calls himself, is obviously working for someone called Leslie.
That's just a cover-up name for... Inspector, tell me about the Carlos Club, do you know it?
Yes, it's been open about 6 months. A perfectly respectable club as far as these places go.
Who owns it?
I think it's a syndicate of some kind.
I take it you're watching the place, Inspector?
Well, naturally. It's under close observation. There'll be a cordon round the club from 8 o'clock onwards.
Good.
Perhaps you'd care to join us this evening.
Oh, just to try and stop us, Inspector.
Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Carlos Club.
Good evening.
Are you a member?
No, I'm afraid not. I'm just delivering this case for someone. Where's the cloakroom?
It's over there, sir.
Oh, thank you.
Well, well. Hello, Clayton.
Well, hang on.
I didn't expect to see you here.
Oh, how are you?
Oh, I'm much better, thanks. What are you doing here? You didn't tell me you were coming to London.
No, I just dropped in to deliver something for someone, and... Well, what are you doing here?
Chubby Costello plays here.
Chubby Costello?
Well, don't tell me you've never heard of Chubby Costello. He's written the music for my new picture.
Oh, I see. Well, if you'll excuse me...
Oh, look, won't you let me buy you a drink?
No, thanks.
Are you sure?
Yeah, quite sure, thank you.
Is Julia with you?
No, she's not.
Oh. Where are you staying?
I'm at the Savoy. Call me sometime.
Yes, I'll do that.
Good night.
Good night, Clayton.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. I want to leave this case with you. Someone called Leslie will pick it up later this evening.
A gentleman, I presume, sir.
Oh, yes, I imagine so. And here we are. This is for you.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. The case will be quite safe. I'll see your friend gets it.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, sir.
I must say, everything seems perfectly normal. I can't even see a police car.
No, you're not supposed to. As a matter of fact, Lloyd's tackled the problem very well, even down to keeping this parking space for us.
Yes. Oh, Paul, there's someone in that van over on the other side of the road.
Don't worry about the van, Steve, or the Blue Saloon, or that black Ford over there. It's Lloyd and his merry men.
Oh, I see.
He said he was going to surround the place, and by Timothy, he has.
I don't understand why we haven't seen Danny. We saw him go into the club, and yet
He probably left by another exit.
And Vince?
Well, it's my bet Vince is still in there.
Paul, there's something I've been meaning to ask you.
Mm.
When Julia Carrington first met Carl Milborn, why did you... Paul, look who's coming out.
I'm watching.
Is that the same case he's carrying?
Yes, that's it. And that's the person we're waiting for. Wind the window down, Steve.
What are you going to do?
I want to get to the corner before our friend with the case does. Good evening, Lonsdale.
Temple.
Let me give you a lift.
I thought you were still in Switzerland.
No, we got back 3 days ago.
But I telephoned your hotel this morning to make sure you were still there. I spoke to the manager and he told me you got to Lucerne for the weekend.
Yes, I know. Actually, you didn't speak to the manager. You spoke to a man called Schmidt.
Schmidt?
I told him you'd probably check up on me.
Why, you interfering...
Give me the case, Lonsdale.
Just try and get it.
Lonsdale, don't be a fool. You'll never get away with it. Lonsdale, look out! The car! How is he, Sergeant?
I don't know, sir. The inspector's with him at the moment. Well, he ran straight into us, just as we were accelerating.
I tried to stop him.
Oh, I know you did, sir. Anyway, the ambulance will be here any minute now. Oh, here's the inspector.
Oh, good evening, Inspector. Is he badly hurt?
I'm afraid he's dead.
But what happens about the money in the suitcase, Paul? Will Julia get it back?
Yes, of course. You've no need to worry about that, Danny.
Mr. Temple, how did this business first start?
Well, it started when Vince Langham heard about the fire in Santa Barbara and decided to write a book about the affair. When the book was finished, Vince sent it to Frida Sands to be typed. The woman who typed it was Dolly Brazer.
Dolly Brazer?
She had a temporary job with the Sands agency at the time.
Oh, so that's how she became involved.
Yes. Vince showed the book to Carl Milborn, who bought it outright and persuaded Vince to use a pseudonym, Richard Randolph.
But how did my brother get involved?
Maurice Lonsdale had lent your husband a large sum of money and he wanted immediate repayment. They were discussing this when Carl mentioned the book Too Young to Die. Lonsdale, who was already operating several rackets, realized that Julia was an extremely wealthy woman and that the book could be used as a means of blackmail.
Well, go on, Paul.
Acting on Lonsdale's instructions, Carl Milborn went to Geneva and did a deal with Julia. But on the way home, he was knocked down and killed.
Oh, so he was killed?
Yes. But Lonsdale was determined that the plan should go ahead, so he telephoned Julia, saying that he was Carl, and that the accident had been faked. Later, he put it out in your mind about the accident, Mrs. Milborn.
Yes, that's when he sent me the hat with a note in it.
Yes.
But the note was in Carl's handwriting.
It was an undated note which Carl had previously sent to your brother. Lonsdale just dated it.
Oh, I see.
But why should Lonsdale want to convince Mrs. Milborn that her husband was alive?
He knew that if Mrs. Milborn thought her husband wasn't dead, she'd say so in no uncertain terms, and that Julia would hear about it. But what Lonsdale didn't bargain for was the fact that Margaret would consult me. When he discovered I was a friend of Dolly's, he told her to warn me to keep out of the case.
But why was the poor girl attacked, Paul?
Oh, to show me that he meant business and to show Dolly that she must never talk.
He scared hell out of me on the train that night. Although I must admit I didn't recognize him at the time. It was dark and he had a scarf over his face.
He frightened you too, didn't he, Mrs. Milborn? He frightened you into telling us that story about Danny and Maidenhead.
Yes, but I did try to stop you from going onto the houseboat, Mr. Temple. It was a friend of mine, an actor, who telephoned you at the hotel. He's quite well known.
Oh, you know, I thought I'd heard that voice before somewhere.
Tell me, Mrs. Milborn, when did you first realize that your brother had been lying to you?
Oh, when I got to St. Moritz. Up till then, I really did believe that Carl was alive. I thought the 2 phone calls I'd received in London and Geneva were genuine.
Was Carl's voice like your brother's?
Yes, very much so, especially on the telephone.
But when did you actually find out about your brother?
The night we arrived in St. Moritz, Morris came into my room. He was angry and he'd been drinking. He said that Carl had been blackmailing Julia Carrington and that the blackmailing had to continue. He said if I didn't help him, he'd throw suspicion onto me.
Which he did, the moment you left St. Moritz.
Is this true?
Yes. He pretended to commit suicide and left a note behind, blaming you for everything.
Oh, Morris.
Paul, tell me, how does Vince Langham fit into all this?
Well, although Vince didn't know what was going on, he wasn't above trying to spot a blackmail himself. He wanted Julia to make a film for him, any film. My bet is, if Julia had said yes, he'd have sued the publishers and done his damnedest to get the book back.
Yes, I think you're right, Mr. Temple. I know my brother was worried about Langham. He thought he was up to something. Because of this, he started to throw suspicion onto him.
The cigarette case?
Yes. Later, he decided to get rid of him. I don't have to tell you and Mrs. Temple what happened.
No. Well, I think Vince has learnt his lesson.
Paul, what's going to happen to the book now?
It doesn't matter what happens to it now, Steve.
It doesn't matter?
No. I phoned Julia this morning. I told her about Lonsdale and what happened last night, and she's decided to tell the truth about herself, about Hollywood, about the fire, about everything.
You mean at long last she really is going to write an autobiography?
Oh, no. Julia can hardly write a letter, let alone a book.
Well, what do you mean?
Just over an hour ago, I had a call from New York, from World Magazine. They want you to write the story of Julia Carrington, Paul.
Me?
They want Paul to write it?
Yeah?
But that's impossible. I'm up to my eyes in work. I've got a new book planned for the autumn, and later in the year
Wait a minute. Does this mean that we'd have to go back to St. Moritz?
I'm afraid so.
Steve, what are you getting at?
You mean now, Danny, straight away?
Straight away, Steve.
Steve, what are you getting at?
He'll write it, Danny. By Timothy, he'll write it.